Hello, I'm Esther Gidoyot. It's Monday, September 13th. This is Africa 54.
Cameroonians flee the worst ethnic violence in years as herdsmen and fishermen clash in the north. Nigerian parents jubilate as they receive 75 of their children who had been abducted by gunmen from their schools. The Black Mermaid. That's what South Africa's first black freediving coach calls herself.
Clashes between herdsmen and fishermen in northern Cameroon are sending refugees, mostly women and children, fleeing into neighboring Chad. David Doyle has more.
Thousands of people have fled northern Cameroon, the UN's refugee agency has said, after violent clashes broke out between herders and fishermen last month. Among those escaping to the town of Unduma in neighbouring Chad, Amina Musa, 8 months pregnant as she undertook the day-long walk to safety.
The first contractions started on the way. I had to rest after every 100 metres of walking. My delivery was facilitated by a village matron 2 days after I arrived. I'm not ready to go back to Cameroon yet because of my newborn baby.
The fighting is between Choa Arab herders and Musgoum fishermen in Cameroon's far north province, according to the UNHCR. A local official said herders were angry their livestock were falling into holes dug to capture fish in receding flood waters. That dispute has escalated, with dozens killed by mid-August and 19 villages torched. Officials describe it as Cameroon's worst ethnic violence in years. Jean-Pierre Semba arrived in Chad with his wife and 6 children.
When I was fleeing, I saw the dead bodies in front of me and I couldn't stay.
Chadian authorities estimate that 11,000 people from both ethnic groups have crossed the border. 98% are women and children, the UNHCR says, and most of the few men are elderly. Thousands more are believed to be displaced inside Cameroon.
David Doyle of Reuters with that report. A state official says 75 children who were kidnapped from their school in Nigeria's northwestern Zamfara State are free on Monday, following their release after the abductors came under pressure from a military crackdown. Gunmen seized the students from the village of Kaya on September 1st, the latest in a series of mass kidnappings from schools across the region. More than 1,100 children have been taken since December. Authorities say they were abducted by heavily armed gangs of bandits seeking ransoms. A spokesman for the Zamfara State governor says no ransom was paid for the 75 children who were received by the governor at his headquarters, but did not say when the children were freed. Meanwhile, authorities say heavily armed gunmen raided a jail in south-central Nigeria late Sunday, blowing up the perimeter fence and freeing 266 inmates, almost everyone in the prison. The Interior Ministry says 1 soldier and a police officer were killed in the attack and 2 guards are missing. A Somali asylum seeker is under arrest by Italian police after he allegedly stabbed 4 women and a 6-year-old child in the tourist town of Rimini on Saturday night, according to ANSA news agency. At the moment, investigators are ruling out terrorism as the motive. Interior Minister Luciana Lamogis called the incident extremely serious and said in a statement that she would be in Rimini on Monday to attend a security meeting. The Somali man, 26, has been in Italy for a few months and has applied for refugee status. He has been in Europe since 2015 and has already applied for refugee status in Denmark, Sweden, Germany, and the Netherlands. Zandile Ndilovu is South Africa's first black free-diving coach, turning the tide on decades of apartheid history in which water sports were reserved for wealthy whites. She calls herself the Black Mermaid. We get more in this Reuters news report.
She calls herself the Black Mermaid. Zandile Ndlovu is South Africa's first black freediving coach, where decades of apartheid history meant that water sports were often reserved for wealthy whites. Ndlovu is trying to change that by introducing the ocean to the country's black youth.
In becoming a freediving instructor, I knew for the first time ever that this passion needed expansion. And the water space has not always been diverse, and I wanted to create a space where diverse representation in the ocean space is possible.
33-year-old Ndlovu first tried snorkeling on a holiday to Bali in 2016 and fell in love with the ocean. She swiftly got her scuba diving certificate the following year. Then she received an instructor certificate in freediving with no equipment. In 2020, she launched the Black Mermaid Foundation.
The Black Mermaid Foundation does work to take kids from local ocean-facing communities to come on a snorkel trip and explore the water, get past the fear, and connect with the water in a way that allows us to believe that these oceans belong to us too. And ultimately, when we believe that we belong, and when we believe that certain things belong to us, then we will protect them.
And her students are taking those lessons home.
I learned that don't be scared, learn to be brave. Sister, they teach us to swim and to know everything in the sea.
Before South Africa's first democratic vote ended white minority rule in 1994, apartheid laws legalized racial segregation across all facets of life. That meant that public spaces like bathrooms and beaches were reserved for whites only. Ndlovu's foundation currently pays for the lessons for the children, many of whom come from impoverished shanty towns.
As I work with the local ocean-facing communities, I think it's an incredible opportunity for local communities to be their own stewards and to also be big stakeholders in the space of ocean conservation, where they are leading the change and are actively doing the work to ensure the preservation of their own oceans too.
That was a Reuters news report. The United States on Saturday marked the 20th anniversary of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people. Speaking with VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin says the United States is safer now than it was 20 years ago.
If you just look at the capabilities that have evolved since 2001, in terms of our ability to collect and to analyze and to track various threats around the globe, our capabilities have increased by orders of magnitude. Our ability to strike has increased by orders of magnitude. But what's most important is that as a government, we operate a lot better, within the interagency in terms of our ability to share information, our ability to coordinate and deconflict. So because of all of those things, I would say, yeah, we are safer.
When you talk about that information, so let me go back to the withdrawal. In April, the intelligence was showing that the Taliban could likely take over Kabul around December, late December. But by July, that timeline had shrunk to late September. So why were you so surprised when they took over in mid-August?
I think what you've heard her say is that the intelligence estimate provided a range of possibilities, and those they changed over time. We'll go back and look at all these things in the future as we assess what happened and assess the things that we could possibly, as an interagency, do better. But until we complete that process, I won't hazard to provide any kind of assessment.
Reflecting, do you think you should have paused the withdrawal when you started getting the intelligence in July that the collapse was more imminent?
Well, again, don't want to get into any hypotheticals or any type of assessments here. I think we owe it to ourselves to do a very deliberate and detailed assessment, not only for the military but across the interagency.
When I was speaking to some of the troops from 10th Mountain Division, they wished they could have gotten to HKIA. They wished they could have gotten to the airport sooner and had a few more people. Do you think that the evacuation should have started sooner?
Well, again, I think our young men and women that were a part of that operation did a tremendous job. And I think once they arrived, and once they secured the airport, they had to defend the airport. They had to evacuate 124,000 people. Of that 124,000, some 6,000 Americans. And we still are, the State Department is still focused on evacuating Americans as we speak. So, I think our young men and women just did a tremendous job. As you've heard me say, I think it was historic because of the size of the airlift, and it certainly was heroic in terms of their actions.
But do you wish you would have started sooner?
Again, we will go back and assess what we did when we did it. But we made our decisions based upon the intelligence and the activities that were going on at that time.
We have been tied to Iraq and Afghanistan because of 9/11, and you actually oversaw the withdrawal of forces from Iraq, only to see U.S. troops return there 3 years later. Why would you oversee the withdrawal from Afghanistan when there were similar conditions in Afghanistan as there were in Iraq when it comes to terrorists?
I think there are actually two. First of all, we never completely left Iraq. As you know, we kept an element in Iraq that was focused on training the Iraqis. But as you compare the two scenarios, they're completely different. They're different people. They're different, facing different adversaries. So I don't think it's fair to compare them head to head.
So you don't see the similarities on the ground now that you saw in Iraq?
There will be similarities in every military operation, but there will be clear distinctions in those operations based upon the threat, based upon the forces available, and based upon the allies that you're working with, the people that you're supporting.
That was U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin speaking with VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb. Be sure to join Africa 54 Tuesday when we'll air part 2 of Carla's interview with Defense Secretary Austin. Let us know what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, remembering the lives lost on the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorism attacks on the United States. Plus, here's Haiti Adams with what's on tap for Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
Join me on the next Straight Talk Africa. As countries worldwide work to get shots in arms, many are running into a problem of trust and vaccine hesitancy. Is fake news to blame? And is misinformation on social media hurting vaccination drives across Africa? We'll speak to Ugandan Dr. Joaquim Chikomeko, also a professional fact checker, as well as a data journalist, to help us separate medical facts from fiction. Also, shutdowns, showdowns, and crackdowns. We'll look at the power struggle between big tech and politicians. Join me, Haiti Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
U.S. President Joe Biden's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for workplaces across the United States is facing pushback from some Republican lawmakers who say they will sue the administration. VOA's Michelle Quinn reports. Okay, moving on to another story. The September 11, 2001 will forever be a date remembered by Americans. On that day, nearly 3,000 people were killed in acts of terrorism on 3 U.S. cities. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden honored the lives lost on the day's 20th anniversary with visits to the sites of the attacks in New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. VOA's Caroline Presutti recaps the day's commemorations.
Silence. Then, marking 8:46 a.m. when the first plane hit.
William G. Biggert.
Brian Eugene Bilcher.
2977. The number of those who died is seared in the hearts of Americans. At the New York City Memorial, President Joe Biden and former Presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. This is the site where 20 years ago, 2 planes slammed into the World Trade Center towers. Biden's pre-recorded words on lessons learned.
In the battle for the soul of America, unity is our greatest strength.
Silence at the Pentagon at 9:37 when a third plane hit. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, 40 passengers forced their plane to the ground after realizing hijackers planned to crash it into another iconic building. The ground of the 4th plane now
a common field one day, a field of honor forever.
Vice President Kamala Harris and former President George W. Bush attended the Pennsylvania Memorial. 20 years ago, then President Bush promised to defeat al-Qaeda as he led the country into wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which the U.S. military just left.
And we have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within.
President Biden did not speak publicly on 9/11. He kept a low profile, changing his flight route and honoring the sites only after the day's events. He talked to a few reporters at an unscheduled stop.
Can al-Qaeda come back? Yeah, but guess what? It's already back other places. What's the strategy? Every place where al-Qaeda is, we're going to invade and have troops stay there?
The citizens who we
At the Pentagon observance, VOA's Carla Babb asked Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin if America is safer today than 20 years ago.
We operate a lot better, within the interagency in terms of our ability to share information, our ability to coordinate and deconflict. So because of all of those things, I would say, yeah, we are safer.
Some say safer, too, because of the lives lost, honored Saturday, and the military who went into battle as a result of 9/11. Caroline Presutti, VOA News, Washington.
An abandoned strip mine near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, is now home to the largest memorial related to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. VOA's Ken Faribault, who reported from the crash site of Flight 93 on September 11, 2001, and the days afterwards, visits with those connected to the incident who attended the 20th anniversary commemoration events.
Yeah, because we started walking down.
On September 11th, 2001, farmers Kenneth and Nelda Brubaker.
I go with Sonny and she goes with Shirley.
Yeah. Were on their way to Shanksville, Pennsylvania to pick up parts for their tractor.
We heard on the radio that there was a plane coming, yeah, but they didn't say it up here, We didn't know it was close to Shanksville,
So close, in fact, Sonny and Shirley just happened to be driving by the right place at the wrong time.
We heard an explosion, we see smoke coming up. There's fire coming out of the hole yet, The trees were on fire, the firemen came, the tops of the trees were burning and stuff. I guess from the jet fuel, probably.
The Brubakers were among the first to arrive at the location where United Flight 93 fell from the sky.
There was so much debris in the trees, We thought it was paper, but I guess it was luggage and stuff,
That day, police quickly dispersed the small crowd gathered near the crash site. The Brubakers left, returning only once in the last 20 years. But something about this year compelled them to make a meaningful visit.
We just wanted to come and see because it happened 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's hitting me now. It was a crazy day,
I experienced the events of September 11th with Ben Miles, who gathered footage of the crash scene that day for our TV news reports.
That crater you see behind me, where all of those workers are.
For the first time since the days surrounding the tragedy 20 years ago.
It's the same, but it's not.
Miles and I visited the Flight 93 National Memorial together. recalling the biggest story of our careers.
I think that I did read that.
But the smallest story of that day, amid all that also transpired in New York and the Pentagon.
We were out here in the field and doing our thing, and I don't know, that day, I'm sure people were glued to the TV all day, and I wasn't.
The public wouldn't fully know until much later that the 40 passengers and crew members on Flight 93 tried to prevent the plane from reaching the U.S. Capitol, its presumed target.
It takes time for all this facts to come out. There was a documentary or a movie put out about this, and I remember watching that, and then I just felt really connected to those people. And that it was just that connection of, well, I was here that day when, not too long after that really terrible thing happened to them and their families.
Miles joined those families for a candlelight vigil to honor their memory near the location of their eternal rest. A place of honor, also commemorated in official 20th anniversary ceremonies attended by dignitaries, including former President George W. Bush.
These Americans were brave, strong, and united in ways that shocked the terrorists.
And Vice President Kamala Harris. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden also visited, placing a wreath and walking the hallowed grounds with Flight 93 families.
This would have been the closest you had ever been.
Yes.
For Ben Miles, time hasn't made it any easier to grapple with what happened that Tuesday in September 20 years ago.
I just moved on, and you don't really think about it like every year for a day, for a little bit you think about it. But we went into the building, and they have all the displays. And yeah, it just hit me, It was just crazy time, It was a terrible day.
Just one police officer came.
The Brubakers say this visit to the Flight 93 National Memorial might be their last. Both Sonny and Shirley are ailing with cancer, and part of the motivation behind their visit is not only to pay tribute, but to find answers.
What was your idea of crashing these planes? What were they trying to prove?
I think that's the question that a lot of people ask.
Questions that linger decades after the attacks that transformed America.
That's the trees beyond the crater.
And the world. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
20 years after the United States and NATO ousted them from power, the Taliban are back in control in Afghanistan. But as VOA's Ayesha Tanzim reports, the country they are trying to rule now is filled with a youthful population that is significantly more educated and aware.
As the Taliban wipe colorful murals with their human faces from Kabul's walls, many wonder how many of the gains of the last 20 years will be washed away with them. The insurgent group now in power is trying to rule a country that looks much different than the one it ruled 20 years ago. And while the Taliban have promised their new regime will be different from the oppressive rule of the 1990s, the international community is expressing profound disappointment with their cabinet selections.
Those who hoped for and urged for inclusivity will be disappointed. There are no women in the names listed. There are no non-Taliban members, no figures from the past government, nor leaders of minority groups.
Still, it's a mixed picture. The Taliban so far have respected the premises of foreign embassies and the United Nations. They have also given public pledges of a general amnesty for all their enemies. And they promise to uphold human rights, including women's rights, as per their Islamic ideology. The international community also hopes to have some sway over the group, given the country's dependence on foreign aid. That help is urgently needed as the country faces a humanitarian crisis.
There is an immediate and pressing need to deliver, on a huge scale, essential humanitarian aid in areas such as health, food security, non-food items, and sanitation.
The Afghans of today are more educated and more connected to the world through mainstream and social media. Since 2004, they are also used to a constitution that gives equal rights to men and women. Many of them intend to use those rights, despite fears of a Taliban reprisal. Tamanna Pariani protested against the Taliban in the streets of Kabul earlier this week. She sent VOA this message on WhatsApp.
برای فعلا که قصد خارج شدن از افغانستان ندارم و در همین شرایط سخت.
For now, I don't have any plan to flee Afghanistan. I am continuing my struggle until the international community accepts the Taliban's government. If the Taliban government is accepted by the international community, I would have no choice but to abandon Afghanistan and seek refuge in another country.
اما اگر حکومت طالب‌ها را جهان به رسمیت بشناسه بعد مجبور میشیم که ما از اینجا بریم.
The Taliban are wiping away many of the changes of the last 20 years, but they also want to be recognized as a legitimate government, and that may require them to step back from extremist positions. Aisha Tanzim, VOA News, Islamabad.
California voters will decide on Tuesday whether to remove Governor Gavin Newsom in a recall election. Mike O'Sullivan reports that both Democrats and Republicans are aggressively mobilizing both voters either for or against the Democrat governor.
Early voting is underway as California Governor Gavin Newsom fights to keep his job. He's leading in the polls, but taking nothing for granted.
It's about making the phone calls and texting. It's knocking on the doors and making sure people understand what the stakes are in this election.
Republicans hope to push the recall vote over 50% to oust the first-term Democrat, as has happened before when actor Arnold Schwarzenegger unseated a California governor in 2003. Hopefuls this time include former Olympic athlete Caitlyn Jenner. But the leader among 46 candidates is conservative radio host Larry Elder, a Republican.
Cost of living, high taxes, high regulations. Those are going to be rolled back when I get into Sacramento.
Prominent Democrats are urging a no vote. But frustration over homelessness, brazen crime, and Newsom's restrictive handling of the pandemic have led to criticism.
I just think he's done a lot of things to hurt California, and we need a change.
California's problems are complicated, says a Newsom supporter.
And it's very difficult to make one set of policy and to administer it.
Thank you for joining us on Africa 54.